stopped the car, and it was a woman driving, Natalie dressed, very casual clothes. She said, can you give me a break? She says, I'm a nun, and I don't really make a lot of money. Well, everybody lies to the police. So I'm thinking, yeah, sure, you got her a nun. She's wearing a wedding ring. She's casually dressed. So I write her a ticket, and in those days, you had the right acknowledge that you're getting a ticket and what you're posting for bond. So she writes on the ticket, Sister Mary Frances. And I thought, oh man, she's really going over the top with this nun thing. You know, I show up in court on a court date. I walk in and the state's attorney goes, hey, who wrote the nun? Well, I look, and now she's got the regalia on, the hat, the big rosary all the way onto the floor, the long thing, the black Oxford shoes. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be me.
Chief Campo, I want to thank you for being here today, and I want to thank you for inviting me into your home. By way of an introduction, I wanted to provide a very brief overview of your 35-year law enforcement career. You started with the Darien Police Department in January of 1978. You were promoted to sergeant in 1990, appointed detective sergeant in 1994, administrative sergeant in 2000, and you were promoted to deputy chief of operations in 2002. Some of your collateral duties included DARE Instructor, Field Training Officer, and you were a member of your agency's SWAT team. In 1999, you were selected to serve as the FIAT SWAT Team Commander, a multi-jurisdictional team serving several agencies within 2 counties. You retired from the Darien Police Department in December of 2003. In January of 2004, you were appointed to serve as the Chief of Police of the Salem, Illinois Police Department. In addition to your duties as the Chief, you served as the commander of the ILEAS Region 9 and 11 Weapons of Mass Destruction Special Response Team. You retired from the Salem Police Department in August of 2014. Chief, thank you for your contributions to our profession, and thank you for agreeing to share your story.
Great. Thanks for being here, Jason. I'm going to enjoy this, I think.
So, why law enforcement? Why did you decide you wanted to be a cop?
When I was in 5th grade, I got hit by a car, and only survived because I was wearing football gear. I was on the way to play football with my friends. And I was, in those days, they put you in a squad car and they drove it to the ambulance. There was no ambulance. They drove me in a squad car to the hospital. And the officer came and visited me a few times, and I just thought that was pretty nice of him and kind of wanted to answer that call.
So you start your career with the Darien Police Department. So did you purposely choose the Darien Police Department? Or did you test at several agencies and they were just the first one to give you a call?
First one. I mean, back in those days, and this is 1977, there'd be 150 guys applying for 2 jobs everywhere. So I got hired in Darien, and a couple weeks later, I got a phone call from Will County Sheriff's Office. And shortly after that, Romeoville. But I figured, hey, these guys called first, I'm going with them. So that's why I went to Darien.
This episode is brought to you by the 555 Group.
Looking for top-tier security solutions backed by real experience? The 555 Group, founded by seasoned law enforcement professionals, delivers elite security services tailored to your needs. With expertise in risk assessment, executive protection, and site security, they provide unmatched professionalism and reliability. Whether safeguarding businesses, events, or individuals, the 555 Group ensures safety with precision and integrity. Trust the experts. Trust the 555 Group.
So you go to the police academy. At the time, where is that at and what's that like for you?
Oh, God. Compared to now, it was at a warehouse in Downers Grove, Illinois.
Get out of here.
It was 6 weeks in a warehouse. We commuted, class of 30-some-odd guys and 1 woman. And we commuted, and it was in a warehouse. So we did everything in the warehouse, and we did PT running around the factory. It was totally different now. 6 weeks total, the entire time, and then they kick you loose.
So you graduate the academy, you go to the Darien Police Department, and you start a field training program. But before we get into that, what's the Darien Police Department like? What at the time? How was it structured? How big was it?
Okay, the city of Darien, Illinois, is in DuPage County, and they were incorporated in 1969. So it was a brand new department, relatively speaking. I think they started the police department in '75. So then they were building, there was more subdivisions going in, so they expanded the police department as one of the first wave of new hires. They had a chief, just 3 sergeants, patrolman, and 1 detective. That was it, and then a secretary.
So what was the field training program like?
Oh
then?
my God. Compared to now, as I recall, now we're talking a long time ago, it was 2 weeks on each shift. So you work 2 weeks on day shift, 2 weeks on afternoons, and 2 weeks on midnights. And it wasn't really training per se. I mean, the thing that would hold you back is you had to memorize all the street names. That was always the big thing. So I would drive around at night because they said the sooner you learn the streets, the sooner you'd be on your own. And that's what I wanted to be on,
Yeah.
out there. So drove around, learned the streets, did two weeks on every shift, and you're on your own.
So you go to the Darien Police Department, and you may not know the answer to this, but I'm curious now. There's 3 sergeants, and the department's only 4 years old or so. So did they start off as patrol officers, or were they hired?
No, they came. Everybody came from outside. We
Okay.
were the first ones that kind of go through the academy. So
Okay.
everybody else was transfers. And before those days, they didn't have lateral transfers per se, so they started whatever their rank structure was at. So they were all experienced officers, when I got there.
So do you remember your first day?
Oh God, I pulled into the parking lot and I was working 7 to 3 and I thought 7 was 7. Not quarter till or whatever. And I walked in, and the night before I had read the entire policy guide, such as it was.
Yeah.
So I was all pumped up, ready to go. And I walk in and I'm walking through the parking lot, and there's a sergeant getting off the midnight shift. And he looks at me, and I'm in uniform, and it's like, who's this guy? And I go, hi, I'm the new guy. And he just says, get in there, you're late. So that was my first introduction. I'm like, oh my God, I better be on time. And my training sergeant was Ed Musio, who became chief of Darien eventually. Showed me a lot of stuff. I was a middle-class kid. I didn't know a lot of stuff. And one of the first calls we went on in field training was an accident on Interstate 55, and we had an intersection there, a ramp there, and a guy had run into the back of a box truck that was parked on the side of the road, and he was beheaded.
Oh.
So we pull up, and it's February, it's cold, it's probably 8 below zero, and what I remember about that is this guy's head just steaming, or what was left of it. And that's my first, again, coming from Oak Park, Illinois, upper middle class kid, I never saw a dead body before.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of like, whoa, this is for real.
So give me that before we dig too deep into the specifics of things. Kind of give me that 30,000 foot perspective of your career, not just at Darien, but ultimately you end up as chief of police at Salem as well.
Yeah, I never wanted to be chief. In fact, I went to Exeter Reconstruction School one time, and they were introduced going around the room. Oh, where are you from? What's your agency? And oh, I'm Joe Blow. I'm from X agency. I want to retire and be a sergeant. Go around the room, and one guy said, yeah, I want to be a police chief, and everybody laughed at him, including me.
Yeah.
And then eventually I became a police chief. So I went through the steps, as you said, my introduction, and I was headhunted for the job in Salem, Illinois. And I went from a metropolitan urban department to a rural city department of 8,000 people, surrounded by cornfields, and on the bottom third of the poverty line of the state of Illinois. There's 102 counties. There were 33 in poverty. 11% is below the poverty line. So it's a huge difference.
Wow.
Coming from there. But when I went to Salem, it was police chief, 3 sergeants, a community resource officer, 1 detective, and the rest were patrolmen. But we had our own dispatch center too. We dispatched for the whole county.
How many patrol officers?
I think there were 9 in total.
So would you, if you were to classify it, and I don't mean this term in a bad way by any means, would you kind of categorize it as small town police?
Oh God, it's absolutely small town. There's no question about it. But what I learned is that small town policing is resourceful. And if you got in trouble in metropolitan DuPage County and you called for assistance, it would rain policemen. They'd come all over. When there's 2 guys working the street, you might get a county guy in 45 minutes, but otherwise it's you too. And I have so much respect for the small town guys.
Yeah, that's incredible. So back to Darien. You successfully complete your field training program in Darien.
I did.
And so what are some of the specialties that you end up rolling into, and how did those impact your career?
Well, I became a field training officer about 4 years in. And that really changed my life. I know you're going to say, oh, field training. How did it change your life? It's because it was a week-long class, and you had the first 3 or 4 days, they were just telling you, okay, you got to cut these guys down. You got to tear them down before you build them up. And the last day, there was a guy who came from California, and he talked about a book named Psychology of Winning by Dr. Dennis Waitley. And he went to, I don't know how this guy even got into class because they didn't fit into what they were talking about. But he said, no, what you need to do is find what people do good and build on that instead of looking for something to criticize them. And I read the book. I read the book every year for 20 years. I gave it to my subordinates when I became chief because it just really taught me, it changes everything. You know, life is a series of choices. You know, oh, I got to do this. I got to do X. No, you're choosing to do X. So it just really changed my paradigm as far as how to teach and how to be an FTO. So I did that. I was a range officer for a while. I was the first guy in Darien to go through DARE, which again, everybody laughed at. But that was an interesting experience. I ended up teaching college, and my DARE experience helped there because I was already a teacher. Became a detective. I really was gearing my career for death investigations. That's what I really wanted to do. Then I got kicked back onto the road, and then was a road sergeant and detective sergeant. Then, for whatever reason, the chief at the time decided that he would move me to administrative because the guy was retiring, and I moved in there. And then the uphill climb started the chief. So it's kind of nothing I had planned for, trust me.
So let's talk about, at some point, you're selected to be the team commander for the FIAT SWAT team, which is, it is a startup team. You had 7 municipalities that had their own very small SWAT teams, but now we're going to pull all those resources and people and put them together. How did you get that gig? And what was that? What were some of the challenges associated with it?
Well, there were 2 openings for FIAT. One was to lead the multi-jurisdictional death investigation squad, and the other was for the SWAT team. Well, we had our 7-man SWAT team, and I didn't want to put into that because I said earlier, I was gearing my career for death investigations. So I put in for death investigations, went through the interview, I get a call back, I go back and I see the brass, and they said, okay, we got good news and they got bad news for you. I said, what's that? I go, well, the bad news is you didn't get the death investigation. And I said, okay. And they go, well, what's the good news? They go, well, we put you in charge of the SWAT team. I said, well, there is no SWAT team. And they go, yeah, you're going to start it. So with that, that's how it started. And here you are, 7 departments. Nobody wants to give you money. And it's like, okay, how do we do this? So I knew a couple guys from different agencies and put a little commander team together that I would. We did interviews. We sent out a letter to everybody saying, if you want it, here's the interview date. We had a series of questions. I selected, God, you probably remember better than I. How big was the starting team? 20 guys?
Yeah, 25 guys.
25 guys. And we started literally we bought surplus Army helmets for $1 a piece. So we spent $25, spray painted them black. That was our SWAT helmet when we first started. We bought load-bearing vests because nobody would have regular vests. And we were up and running in a year with policy and call-outs, and off we went. So that's how that started. But it was not a career choice. Kind of eased into that as well.
So you're with the Darien Police Department, you move over to the Salem Police Department. You basically do, in my opinion, 2 full careers. I mean, it's really what it comes down to, 35 years in total. So you basically do 2 full careers. During that time, let's talk about incidents that stand out in your mind at either agency, because as a chief of police in a small town policing, it's not to assume that you weren't making traffic stops there on occasion if needed, but are there any traffic stops that stand out in your mind?
Well, I know that it's kind of something that's a dangerous thing. I don't have that. I mean, of course, I made thousands of traffic stops, lots of drugs arrests, guns and cars and stuff, but the one traffic stop that stands in my head is every cop that worked the road has a violation. It just always sets them off, and they're going to write them no matter what. For me, it was failure to signal turning left. You know, if you were at an intersection and it's 3 lanes and, you know, it could be a through lane and all of a sudden the light changes and somebody turns signal, now you're stuck. That drove me up a wall. So stopped the car, and it was a woman driving, Natalie dressed, very casual clothes. And I walked up and said, ma'am, may I see your driver's license, please? Sure, officer, what did I do? I said, you failed to signal turning left. You're supposed to signal, I think it was 150 feet from the intersection. She says, oh, I'm so sorry. She said, can you give me a break? She says, I'm a nun and I don't really make a lot of money. Well, everybody lies to the police. So I'm thinking, yeah, sure, you got her a nun. She's wearing a wedding ring. She's casually dressed. And I said, look, well, no, I'm going to write you a ticket. So I write her a ticket. And in those days, you had the right acknowledge that you're getting a ticket and what you're posting for bond. So she writes on the ticket, Sister Mary Frances. And I thought, oh man, she's really going over the top of this nun thing, you know, it's supposed to be legit. So anyway, we had court every month. I show up in court on a court date. I walk in and it was in Downers Grove and all the violators are sitting on one section of the cops always sit in a jury box. And I walk in and the state's attorney goes, hey, who wrote the nun? Well, I look and now she's got the regalia on, the hat, the big rosary all the way out to the floor, the long thing, the black Oxford shoes. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be me. And he goes, okay, well, what happened? I related the story, just related you. And so now the arraignment comes, she pleads not guilty. State's attorney comes back, he goes, okay, what do you want to do? I said, well, let's drop the ticket. I said, I'm not writing it none. Yeah. And he goes, no, it's a good case. We're going to go with this. I go, no, we're not going to go with this. I go, I'm going to forget my testimony. I'm going to say, this is not the woman. I said, I'm going to make you look stupid up there. Just now I process it. So now I process it and, you know, she walks away. And now I run out to meet her in the lobby. And I said, Sister, I am so sorry. I said, you know, people lie to police habitually. I said, I saw the wedding ring and it just threw me. And she says, well, you know, we're married to God, which I didn't even know. Who knew? So that's the one traffic stop that really just stands out of my head.
That's crazy. That's incredible. So before we jump into more stories, when you look back at your career, your 35 years, what are some of the high points?
Well, as you alluded to, I started 2 SWAT teams, not just one, 2 out of scratch. The one in Illinois they had nobody. The state police, the response times were out of control. If they came from Springfield, and we were, you know, a couple hours away from Springfield. And fortunately, at that time, ILEAS, or Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, was getting tons of cash from Homeland Security, and they wanted to start a regional team. And they reached out to me, and I started that. So I'm not so sure there's too many guys that can say you started from basically nothing. So I'm very, very proud of that. Mm-hmm. When I went to Salem, they had a very peculiar scheduling system. They had guys on permanent shifts, but only one guy worked Monday through Friday with weekends off on days. Everybody else had Tuesday, Wednesday off, Wednesday, Thursday off. You worked every weekend, and it was insane. And the union came up to me and asked me if I'd entertain 12-hour shifts. And it would 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, reverse the next week. So I said, yeah, this is stupid. How can one guy out of 15 guys gets weekends off? That's insane. The sick time was through the roof. So we called the union, put a side agreement together, did it for 6 months. And to this day, I've been gone 10 years. They're still doing it. So
wow,
very happy about that. Again, back to Salem. The first year I was there, I went down from urban Chicago to Salem, Illinois. They had a huge meth problem. You know, what does an urban guy from Chicago know about meth? I'll tell you, nothing. But we got very aggressive. We started seizing houses and cars, and the crime rate went down 50% the first year.
Wow.
So I'm happy. I'm pretty proud of that too. So I did a lot of stuff. I delivered a baby. So I'm pretty happy about that too. So.
Throw that in on the side.
Yeah, that's on the road.
Any particular, other than delivering a baby, any particular incidents when you look back at your career that kind of stand out in your mind?
Delivering a baby was pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, the very first call outs on both my SWAT teams were colorful.
Share those.
The first one in FIAT, which was DuPage County, was a guy on the standing over the bridge of Ogden Avenue, very major street over Interstate 294, which handles 100,000 cars a year, and he was going to kill himself. So I was playing hockey at the time, and I get a call off the ice. They go, hey, we got this guy. So it was very embryonic. This was like very first call out. We only had a couple guys respond, and it was like a bad B movie. You know, the guy's there, he's going to kill himself because of the girl. A priest is called to talk him up. Like Father Flanagan. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I'm sitting there with the other guy, and the Chiefs were very reluctant to bring the SWAT guys in because they thought we were just going to blow this guy away or something. And we weren't going to do that. You know, it's a fragile situation. Mm-hmm. But the point of the story is now Interstate 294 is 4 lanes in each direction. Well, they took 4 lanes and they pushed them out to the on-ramp and taken it off the off-ramp. Well, you know, you think people would be empathetic to this, but after sitting in traffic for 90 minutes creeping their way up, they had no empathy for this guy. They're yelling at him to jump, you know, all the time. And so myself and Lou Hayes are standing there going, we're not going to let this go on anymore. So he's talking to the priest. Now they bring the girlfriend in to talk to her. And we just tackled this guy, yanked him off the thing, and it was over. So and that was that. Conversely, the first team in Southern Illinois was a guy who had an AK-47 in a house with like 15 people. It was insane. And I was a little nervous because our team had never really done anything, but it went off according to Hoyle. There was no problem. We found the AK, took the guys in custody. It was a big deal. And it really got us a lot of notoriety in Southern Illinois. And then we started really getting call-outs, a lot of call-outs.
And this is probably one of those incidents, the AK-47, but ever get that feeling with the hair standing up on the back of your neck and you're like, oh, something's not right about this?
Not in this, yeah, well, I was a commander, so I wasn't a door kicker per se. I mean, there were a couple of times I'd have to be one of the first 4 guys in on the react team, but generally I was directing other officers. But I was working as a road sergeant, and we got a call at night from, it just said a guy needed to talk to a policeman. Well, that's a 2-man response. And I went to it with another officer who probably shouldn't have been a policeman. He was a little hinky, didn't like to get in this kind of stuff. And it was 3 in the morning, and on a Sunday, we go to this guy's house, and the house is completely blacked out. Yelling for this guy, Joe, you here? Joe, you here? No answer, no answer. And now we got our guns out because there's the feeling, you know, going up in your neck. And we go through the entire house. We can't find him. We go into the garage, and there he is, standing on a ladder with a noose around his neck, pictures of his family on the header board, and he says, you need to talk me out of here because I'm going to jump.
Wow.
And we ended up talking him off, and it turned out his wife left him. He was going through a divorce. He wasn't going to get custody of the kids, and he wanted to kill himself. But that was the creepiest thing, going through the house, essentially by myself, because like I said, the officer didn't want to, he left the law enforcement that didn't want to be there, and that was very, very nerve-wracking.
You ever do something and maybe in the middle of doing it or afterwards, you're like, oh, that was not the best idea?
Well, yeah, here we go.
As Ray Byrne likes to say, give you an opportunity to tell on yourself.
Yeah. I was in Salem. I was police chief for not too long, a few weeks, maybe a month, and we had a guy barricaded in his house, yelling obscenities, tearing the house apart, said he had a gun. He had a couple guys on scene. I get there, and the state police won't even come out for that. It's, the SWAT team's not coming out. So what am I going to do? I got 3 guys. So I said, make a couple calls. We got a couple other guys come in. This guy's not coming out. And again, he's got a weapon, and he's high. He's totally, methed out. And so I did a crash course on dynamic entry. And with 3 guys, it was me. I'm the point guy because I'm the only guy that's got SWAT training. And then 2 other guys go, here's how we're going to do this. And 20 minutes max. So another officer who was just fantastic officer, he's 50 years old, but this guy could bench press his weight, just do anything. He wanted to be involved. They go, look, you caused a distraction in front of the house, so we're going to come in through the back. Well, my idea of his distraction was pound on the door, something like that. What he took was a 55-gallon garbage can, picked it over his head, and he threw it through the plate glass window of the guy's house. And then we came in through the house, and we took the guy without incident. But at the time, if I had to do it over again, number one, he wouldn't be the distraction guy. But that was really, in hindsight, probably super unsafe. That was just like incredibly unsafe. I don't know if I'd do that. I guess another story, and this is a Darien Patrol story. The new guy always got to do the transports. Because, if the guy urinated in his pants, you're not going to put that in your squad car. So I got that guy, and they were cloth seats in those days. And our cars didn't have cages. So you would just put him in the back seat and away he went. So got a call of a disorderly conduct. It was a drunk female making 911 calls that were unsubstantiated. She was going to disorderly conduct. Called me in to be the transport guy. Veteran officer handcuffed her. I just put her in the back seat of the car. I drove about a half a block. Now I'm at the stoplight. I see her moving around in the back. quite, like, man, she's moving around a lot. I look in the rearview mirror, and what she had done is she had gotten out of her handcuffs, and one cuff was loose with the ratchets hanging out. And I turned around just in time to see her coming forward like that.
Wow.
And I grabbed her hand, and I grabbed her by the throat, and I jumped into the back seat because we didn't wear seatbelts in those days. And the fight is on. Well, the car's in drive. So the car starts to creep through the intersection, and here's the officer behind me. He's on foot chasing the car, trying to get the car to stop. I'm in a dogfight in the back seat. She's just an Amazon of a woman. Ripped the sleeve off my shirt. All the buttons are gone. The car has now gone up on the curb, and it's toddling along. And I punched this lady in the face twice, and it stunned her enough that I could cuff her. And I fall out of the car, and they're like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And I went through it. So he charged me with aggravated battery. I go to court, and they asked me, "Officer," smug attorney, "Officer, did you hit my client?" "Yes, I did." "How hard would you say you hit my female client?" "As hard as I could." And then we went through the whole thing. So she got no jail time. She got a $100 fine, and she had to pay for my uniform shirt. It was, that's it. But she came up to me after court and apologized. So it was. But if I had to do over again, the point of this whole story is, should have checked the cuffs. That was a super basic mistake. Didn't do it. Never did it again.
Wow. What about when you were detective sergeant? Any interesting cases that your agency investigated?
Probably the most notable one. I had a partner that was going to alcohol rehab, so I was on my own, and came in one day, very innocuous, noticed that two young boys were on a river trip with a gentleman, and they stopped in Paducah, Kentucky, and they got off the guy was on a boat, it was his boat, and they ran to the police department and says, "Hey, we're being molested by this guy," and his name was Robert Scudder, lived in Darien. Turns out it was probably one of the biggest cases of my life, because once it got published, victims came out of the woodwork. I would come in after interviewing a victim, and there'd be 5 more phone calls to return to these victims. We ended up identifying 25 victims of this guy who ran pretty much a baseball team. He started a baseball league, had all the kids, come to his house. They'd watch movies, play video games, whatever they were doing, and he molested them. And, case went to trial. Never even went to trial. The guy took a straight plea, went to jail, and that was that. But that was probably one of my most notable cases. That, of course, there's death investigations, a lot of those. But
1979, you come on. I want to go back a little bit, because I think when you talk about guys that came on in the 60s and the 70s, you're talking about a completely different set of equipment for the most part. So what was, you see guys today, and it's like they're ready to drop in, parachute in with the 82nd Airborne, and compared to what law enforcement was in the late 70s. What kind of gear did you have, and how did you see that change?
God, it was a Stone Age. It was, I had a revolver as my first gun with speed loaders. We thought that was, really hot shit. You load 6 at the same time. And we had a handcuff case and a nightstick, and most guys carried a 4D cell flashlight. There were no Kel lights in those days. It was just a flashlight. We got ours a Radio Shack. They were plastic, so if you used it, the plastic broke. You had to go buy another one. And that was it. I mean, you had to talk people down, otherwise they were just getting pummeled. And that was,
In the cars, what did you have in the cars?
A radio. There's no mobile data computers or anything, if you got a call, I could remember the streets, I couldn't remember the address, so I'd write down the number. Hey, you're going to go to the Deer Path line. Okay, here's the address, and you go there, and that was it. You had a bucket that had all your case report, or your blank case reports, because you'd write them in the car.
Sure.
Never went to the station, but that was it. It was the squad. Our cars did not have shotguns in a rack. They were in the trunk. So if something happened, you had to run to the trunk and get it. And then in the back of the trunk, there would be like flares, more paperwork, stuff like that. But it was very utilitarian, to say the least.
So eventually you get promoted to deputy chief. Is that a tested rank or an appointed rank?
Appointed.
So you get appointed to deputy chief, you become deputy chief. And what was that job like for you?
Well, there were 2 deputy chiefs. One did administration, I did operations.
Okay.
So It was really a good fit for me because I ran the SWAT team. So we were doing call outs and trainings and stuff like that. It didn't upset the operation of Darien. I was in charge of the detectives and the patrol division. So things that came through pretty much dealt with, but I had really good staff. I didn't have to do a whole lot of supervising. Just annoying stuff, abuse of sick time, things like that. But I had such a good staff, I didn't really get dragged into a lot of like drama per se.
So at some point, you decide that, you know what, I'm going to move on from Darien and pursue a career with another agency. How does that decision come about? And of all places, how do you end up in Southern Illinois?
Well, there was a change of administration, change of mayors, change of police chiefs, and I was headhunted by a search group to come to Southern Illinois. And I had tested at other police departments because I thought, okay, I've done the deputy chief gig for a while. I think I'd like to be a real chief. So I tested in DuPage County. It was the same story. I was always a bridesmaid, never a bride. I'd get to the final stats and then they'd stay with the inside guy or whatever. So finally, when I get headhunted to go to Salem, Illinois, the search group calls me up and I said, okay, before we waste everybody's time, they got an inside guy they go, no, they want to go outside. You get a lot of problems there. So I went down there, interviewed, got hired, and I went from, like I said, a municipal department to a rural department. And it made me a better person, not just a better policeman, because I didn't know what poor was until I went down there. And, and I saw people living hand to mouth and living in trailers. They had no floors. I mean, just unbelievable poverty. So it was kind of eye-opening. It was a big learning curve for both of us. Here comes this guy from Chicago who talks fast, and I'm coming to a rural area where there's cattle trucks driving through town. It was a little kind of strange for both of us, I think.
And that's a great point, a learning curve for both. So how were you received coming from the outside into a smaller agency?
What a great question. So the day I get down there, I'm getting sworn in at like the 6 o'clock meeting. And at 3 o'clock, I arrive and I buy the local paper. And there's a letter to the editor. And this guy is just ripping on me by name, saying, I can't believe we're hiring this guy from Chicago. We got to have somebody here. And I didn't know then, and actually until I married my wife, that people from Southern Illinois hate Chicago. It's, that they just do not, because all the money goes up there.
Yeah,
and they're right. I trying to get something out of the state financially was very challenging. So at first that was my introduction. So I get sworn in, and I had my meeting before I got sworn in. The city manager at the time, Roger Kinney, Renaissance man, the guy was a genius, called me, had me come down to the department and introduce myself. So I get down there and I told all the guys, I go, look, if you're a veteran that's had problems, use me as a fresh start. Said, I'm not going to look at any personal files or anything until we get rolling here. If you get in trouble, I have to go back there and look. But otherwise, fresh start. And that's how we got started. So I go to walk into work one day, and it's the meet and greet, and a lady comes up to me and she goes, Chief, are you going to take me off midnights? She worked permanent midnights as a dispatcher, did not want to come off it. Well, that's the hardest shift to fill. Yeah. I'm like, no, you can stay as long as you want. And then another guy comes up to me and says, Chief, I need some new breeches. Could I get breeches? I haven't heard that word since I read a book on Abraham Lincoln. And so we kind of laughed about it. And so there was that. Then, I don't know, maybe a week later, I walked in and there's a note on my desk with a copy of the case report. And the memo said to Chief Campo from, Sergeant, and I'm going to say his name because he was a great cop. We're still friends. Sergeant Lynn Gardner, regarding warning shot. Now, this is 2004. We haven't done warning shots in, forever. So I'm like, are you kidding me? And so the story is they get a call of 2 guys stealing anhydrous ammonia to use meth. Now, a week later from Metro Chicago, I didn't know how it would work, but they were using it for meth. Well, they get the call. They see these guys running. Sergeant Gardner can't catch them. So he pulls his gun out and he fires around into the dirt. Well, at that precise moment, offender number 1 trips and falls. Offender number 2 thinks he just got shot, throws his hands up and calls it a day. And so so I'm like, are you kidding me? Well, I looked through their policies, and their policies hadn't been rewritten since 1985, and warning shots were permitted. An hour after that, here comes Sergeant Gardner. He walks in, he goes, hey, Chief, I just want to know how many days I'm going to get suspended. I go, well, actually, none. And he goes, why? I said, because according to policy, that was legit. Now, by the time you hit the front door, that policy is going to be rescinded and there'll be no more warning shots. Yeah. But, you know, he says, thank you very much. And, you know, we went with life. But it was a learning curve for both of us. I mean, I can tell you story after story that's like, really?
So you talk about the policies not having been updated since 1985, and we talked about the equipment when you started in Darien in 1979. What was the equipment they had? What was the state of that?
Well, actually, the fire chief was an IT guy, so they were really up to snuff on their computers. I mean, they had everything was cutting edge as far as that goes. I mean, equipment-wise, they were fine. Policy-wise, they were behind. I remember one time coming in and there was a report of domestic violence where a guy beat his wife and no arrests were made. So I talked to the officer and he goes, well, you know, he'd been cranking on her all day, or she'd been cranking on him all day, and, you know, he just went to shut her up. So I just, you know, let it go. No, it's a mandatory arrest situation. You go back and arrest them. So we had some of those moments. Sure. But, you know, we learned to, again, they were very open-minded to take me. I was very, I think, took it as a learning experience that I loved my time at Salem. It was great.
So we talked about the high points, now being very closely related, but a bit more distinct. What are some of your fondest memories of the job?
Well, delivering a baby was a pretty good thing. And, you know, here's the funny thing. So get a call and I go with an officer who didn't like the sight of blood. And, you know, we beat the ambulance there and she's having a baby now. So the dad's freaking out. The officer's standing there. I go down with the dad and get some warm water. So he runs downstairs and gets some water, and I'm literally delivering the baby. So the baby comes fine, no issues. And when's the last time you had baby training? Well, FTO, basic police school in 1978, 6 weeks in a warehouse. That was the training I had. So, you know, deliver the baby. Mom's fine, baby's fine. Hospital, you know, ambulance, off she goes. And the officer says, why did you have me go get warm water? I go, well, I always do it in the movies. I need it. So what kills me about that is I never saw the family again. But somewhere in Illinois or who knows where, I'm a story. Yeah. She said, hey, a cop delivered me back when, you know, I was a little kid. And so there's those, and every cop you interview has probably got stories like that.
Did they live in town? Or
they live right across the street from the police station, actually.
And you never saw them again?
Never saw them again. Deliver a baby, biggest moment of their life.
You always hear about stories about it, and 16 years later, they came back.
Yeah, really? No.
Maybe they came back after you went to Salem, and they just missed you.
Yeah, that must be it. No, I'm thinking, I wouldn't even know her name. If she came to me and said, you'd deliver me. Okay, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe it's Rhonda.
Yeah, that was
so that's a best memory from Darien. You got one of your best memories from Salem?
Oh God, let me think. You know, I worked with some absolutely. Here's a memory again. I was a boss. I didn't, you know, I think I made 3 traffic stops in 10 years. But I had a detective that was probably one of the sharpest detectives I ever worked with. We had a gun store, and the gun store got broken into, and it was a smash and grab. They threw a bunch of stuff into plastic totes, and off they went back. They went into Chicago. So the detective, his name was Brian Green, saw the lids that they left behind and researched who sold these particular lids.
Wow.
Lowell's hardware store sold this kind of box. Goes to Lowell's, pulls the receipts of who bought these lids within the last day. Long story short, looks at the cameras, gets the offenders, those are the guys. So he has to go up to Chicago. He goes, hey, they want me to come up because they identified these guns. I go on up. You know, he said, well, I said, we'll pay for it. Take the car. Off go. So now here you go. He goes up there and he goes, hey, anybody want a soda? And the Chicago guy, hey, big country, we got pop up here. But I mean, as far as that goes, I mean, that was just, I mean, I couldn't say enough nice things about that guy. I mean, he was a fantastic detective. I mean, that was a great memory. The way we pulled the SWAT team together, we handled 33 counties in Southern Illinois. It's massive, massive landmass. And we had guys from all over. And I mean, little departments, 3 guys would send 1 guy to SWAT training. And, you know, the fact that that team is still in existence, extremely proud of. I had to put them up against anybody because they were that good.
Wow. Anybody that you looked to throughout your career or as you were getting started as a mentor?
A couple sergeants when I was in Darien. I talked about Ed Musio, who became chief, you know, very strict guy, by the book guy. But I learned a lot from him. And then the second guy, really learned a tremendous amount of street stuff, was Sergeant Phil Bowen. He was a cop's cop. And I learned a lot from him. You know, again, as a middle-class kid, never saw a dead body before. You know, wouldn't know how to, I mean, I went a year before I made my first open liquor pinch, you know, because I didn't know what to look for.
Yeah.
And this guy showed me what to look for. And then when I got moved to detective, he was my supervisor, great detective, learned a lot from him there. And then when he retired, I became a detective sergeant. I took a lot of his skills and passed them on to my subordinates. So those are guys on the job that I looked to. And then I had 2 city managers that I worked for that were just tremendous guys. Rick Corneal was a guy from Darien, and he made me think outside the box. You know, he really made you think about people. And then, as I said before, Roger Kennedy from Salem was a Renaissance man. This guy never went to college, but he knew about engineering, and he knew about cigars, and he knew about the best wines to drink, and he knew about sewage rates. I mean, just amazing, amazing guy. And just my first interview, my first evaluation as police chief there, we went out to dinner and we drank scotch. That was just the greatest guy. And he was like, okay, well, you know, here's the bad news, you know, and it was something really stupid, like, you know, wear a different tie or something, just ridiculous. But no, they loved the job I was doing, and that was our interview. So Roger Kennedy, by far.
Biggest changes you saw in the profession during the course of your career?
Equipment, for sure. Computers, for sure. Cameras, for sure. I mean, we got the cameras in the squad cars, and of course there was the balking. But as soon as I exonerated a couple of guys of false issues, then all of a sudden we became fans. I think you know, one of the things that you can't put your hands on is I see a lot of change in police management. I see a lot of chiefs, they don't really seem to stand behind the guys as much as the old school guys did. It seems to me that, especially after George Floyd and that all happened, everybody turned tail and they didn't want to offend anybody. I really was looking for a guy to say, hey, stand by my guy, did the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, especially after Michael Brown in St. Louis. That happened 3 weeks after I retired. Well, I read the DOJ report. Everybody that said, I saw this, recanted. But yet the narrative is the same.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that was a big change too. I'd like to see a little more, some of the management guys stand more behind their guys. I think that. But the training's better, way better now. FTO training is months. That really needed to be done.
Academy's a little bit longer.
Yeah, but that was a good thing too. I mean, not the 6 weeks. I mean, I was a fish out of water. Was it 3 months now?
Yeah,
maybe even more. I don't know.
And they offer weekend classes now. If you want to go above and beyond, it's crazy.
Crazy. Long overdue, but definitely. I mean, in 12, make it a year. You're still not going to. The first couple of calls, you're not going to know what to do.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's interesting because, you know, I talk to a lot of guys about this and the impact the job had on their family. And, you know, some guys tell me, you know what, I had no idea the impact it was having till I left the job. And then I was able to look back because when I was on the job, I was in it and I never saw it. What impact did the job have on you and your family?
Well, it definitely made me a lot more suspicious of people. To this day, you know, I still, you know, somebody says something, you know, raise an eyebrow. Yeah. I didn't think that it did. I was very aware of personality changes in law enforcement. And I remember reading a magazine and it was a picture of a battered child. And the caption, the catchline was, guess who had a bad day at work? So I cut that picture out and I taped it to the door of my garage. So every day I would pull my car in and that's what I would see. So I always try to think, okay, I'll leave whatever, you know, drama might be in the garage. So I tried to do that. I'm not so sure it's successful sometimes. I mean, can I get to a story?
Yeah.
probably the worst call I ever had. I don't know if you're asking that later, so if I jump the gun.
No, you're good. Go.
In this, some guys had been involved in officer-involved shootings. I was shot. There was a shot fired once. It was probably in the air, not at me. But the call that really messed me up was we got a call of an unknown problem, myself and another officer. And it's an unknown problem. You don't know what you're going to. So we get there, and it's pandemonium. It's a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a dad who's soaking wet holding an 18-month-old baby in his arms. So he gives me the baby who's soaking wet and said, I found her in the pool. So we were able to cobble the story together that what had happened was the dad was going to take a shower. He had told the 5 and the 3-year-old to watch the 18-year-old or 18-month-old, and they had a pool in the backyard. It was an above-ground pool with a deck around it, and he said, watch your sister. Well, they didn't, and she went out onto the deck and fell into the pool. He gets out of the shower. Hey, where's your sister? Well, we don't know, and then he finds her in the pool, and thus the phone call. Well, what I remember about it was the officer, remember I told you the officer who didn't like the sight of blood?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
He wasn't big on first aid either. So I get the baby, and the movie Ghost had just come out, and I had just seen it, which I don't know if you remember that, Patrick Swayze, and he's above. Well, I'm giving this child mouth to mouth, and I just felt her cold. There was none of this stuff. It was no gloves. You didn't wear gloves in those days. And it was mouth to mouth. And, he's blowing her chest, giving her CPR. And I just kept thinking, Jesus Christ, she's right up there. And, it's messed me up now, 20 years later. Yeah. And I just remember, oh my God, this kid's going to die. And she died. And, we left it and we went to the station, and there was no mental health. Then this day, well, man, that really sucked. And what happened? Oh, it's a call. This little girl died. And he goes, well, that sucks. Okay, well, you got 3 calls stacked up. Get to it. So there was none of that. So to your original question, it affected your family. So I came home, and I was a mess, still a mess. Here I am. And my wife at the time says, I said, man, I had a really tough call. I usually don't talk about this, but I had a little girl die in my arms. And I had a above ground pool. I was building a deck around the pool. And she goes, wow, that's terrible, but when are you going to finish our pool? And I go, and my kids were 4 and 2 at the time. I go, finish the pool. I want to take an axe to this pool right now. And, that wasn't the catalyst, but the marriage failed because of me. I was really into my job. And so it didn't last, and so it did take a toll subliminally, I think. Now, as a dad, I got great kids. One's a firefighter. One's a mental health counselor in St. Louis in the school district. But as a husband, I was shit. So, I think, and I was career focused.
So let me ask you, that particular incident, and really it was the culture of the profession at the time, and still is in many agencies. Did that change how you interacted with your people when they were involved in a critical incident, something similar to that? Were you more aware as a result of that?
Oh, absolutely. I went to 5 weeks of accident reconstruction school. And I was at the White Sox game, Chicago White Sox game. I got a phone call, said, hey, we got a fatal accident. We need you to come out. Well, I was fresh out of accident reconstruction school, so I figured, oh, great. Well, what had happened was 3 young men in a car were driving through the streets of Darien with their lights off. They called it running silent. So they were speeding through this side street, and the street turned. Well, the street turned, they didn't. And they plowed into this tree with such force, off-center, and it was straight physics. I mean, went off-center, the car hit and corkscrewed around the tree, driving the engine. The engine was 50 feet away from the car. They hit it with such speed, and 2 of the 3 boys died on scene, right there. Mm-hmm. So by the time I get there, I got 1 kid in the hospital, critical condition, 2 fatals. The officers are trying to piece it all together. And I worked that case for, 10 days or whatever. And everybody was, this is a gruesome scene. Mm-hmm. It's horrible. So I reached out to some mental health experts that were in Illinois, and it was cutting edge stuff. They didn't do this. So I got together the officers, the paramedics, and the fire department that extricated the live guy, and we did a sit down. So here comes a pastor, and it went as you would expect. The cops sat there like this. The paramedics and the firemen were great, but the cops weren't used to that. And as it turned out a little later on, like a week later after this, it was great for the firemen and paramedics, and even myself, post facto. The cops, not so much. I get a call from this pastor, says, Ron, you'd be really good at this. Would you like to go around the state? And no, not wired like that. I said, I'm a tactical guy. But I was very, very aware of it. Now, coincidentally, and I go to Salem, and I had an officer going through a divorce. I had two officers going through divorce. One guy caught his wife having an affair. He came to work that night. Once I found out about it, he kicked her out of the house, and I said, you don't need to work. He goes, I'm good. I'll work. And he handled it just fine. Another guy, same situation, he tried to kill him. So I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, so-and-so put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. I go, well, then what? He goes, well, he flinched at the last second and he's just wounded.
Wow.
So, but you can't force guys because of the stigma. And I think it still exists, to be honest.
So you kind of label yourself as a tactical guy, but you were a DARE instructor.
I know, isn't that weird?
So talk about DARE a little bit. Was that a rewarding experience for you? I know, of course, the answer. You're going to say yes. Nobody's going to say no, it sucked. For sure. But what was that like for you?
Well, it was the first one ever from Darien to go be a DARE guy. So we didn't know what we were doing. They said, hey, it was myself, another guy, Greg Charay, a great detective also. And they said, hey, you're going to go down to DARE school and teach drug awareness. We're like, okay. So we go down there, and we were a fish out of water. I remember we had to give a 3-minute speech, and it had to be exactly 3 minutes because it was taught by school teachers. So they said, you got to give a 3-minute speech on something, like a how-to speech. So I gave a 3-minute speech, and they dinged you for if you went over or you went under. So I did a speech on how to be a hockey goalie, because I was playing hockey at the time. So so that part was okay. And I went up and I dealt with the ridicule of the police department. And it was a good gig. It was a Monday through Friday gig in the schools, but it was different. I mean, you're talking kindergarten through 6th grade or 8th grade, and you can hold a kindergarten's attention for 5 minutes, and they're bouncing off the walls. And then when I got into the high schools, it was great because they were asking really serious questions. So it was great for 2 years. It was definitely a change of pace, but that's not what I signed up for. So after 2 years, they moved me on.
Interestingly, though, because you say it was great, they were asking really interesting questions. At some point, either towards the end of Salem or after Salem, or while you're at Salem, you actually start teaching college courses.
I did. There was a junior college near Salem's Kaskaskia Junior College, and they had way too many kids in the law enforcement class. And and I was coming from Chicago, so I guess I had some cachet. And they bring me into class, and they said, "Hey, we're overloaded. Would you be interested in teaching half these kids?" And I was kind of cocky, and I said, and they had an old-time teacher. They'd been there forever, and me. And I said to the class, I go, would you introduce yourself? And I give them a short overview. And I go, hey, if you take my class, it'll be unlike any class you ever took. So half the class went with me. Again, we go back to my city manager. He thought it was great that I was teaching, a couple days a week, or I did 1 day a week there while I was working, because I would stay late. That's how I'd make up the time. And I actually hired a couple of my former students as the years went along.
That's awesome.
And then that led into a gig at McKendree University, where I did the same thing. And I taught anything from basic law enforcement to constitutional law to police administration. And I did that for a number of years too. And I have Facebook friends that are former students of mine that stay in touch. They became law enforcement people. So it's been it's super rewarding. And plus I got a pension out of it. So
there you go. There you go. All right, so I'm going to circle back to SWAT because you covered a couple of activations, but you had a large number of activations in multiple jurisdictions. And give me one that really stands out that you didn't already share with us.
Generally, especially starting a new team, it's always the screw-ups that you remember.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier, where we had a call out in Darien, was a guy was in his house, and we were a relatively new team, and we spray painted our helmets black, so we had black gear. And then we went out in a January day, and there was snow on the ground, and the guys, I see you, and I see you, and you guys are like, oh, well, okay, we're gonna need to get some white gear.
Yeah.
So that was a big one. I remember going to a house in a small town, and the guy supposedly had guns in the house on the stairs. So if you came in, he was going to run up the stairs grabbing guns as you go. And we, did the house. And again, we talk about poor people. This guy had no running water. He would shit in a bucket, and then wipe his ass with toilet paper and throw it in a paper bag. That's what we went into. And, I did a lot of years. 1999 is when we formed SWAT, and I was still doing it in 2010 as a commander. And then I lost my edge.
Yeah.
And we did a raid in Centralia. It was in a Section 8 place. There was it's always guns on SWAT stuff, and I was scared to death for my guys. I mean, I was just worried. I can't do that. I'm so worried about them. I'm not thinking, tactically. So I turned the thing over, the team over to a great commander, former Marine, ex-Marine, named Scott Birds from Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. And he ran with it, but they forgot to take me off of the call list.
Oh.
That's the worst. You're out, and all of a sudden you get the call out, and you're kind of going, look, I'm not on anymore.
Yeah.
So that was bad. We did a run in Darien where we did this house 3 different times. The first time, in a short period of time, maybe 6 weeks, we were there 3 times because they just would not stop selling drugs. First time, right through, no problem. Second one, the mom's yelling at us, don't wreck my door, I just replaced it. And the third one was, now they built the door we broke into, and they built another door in there. So when our guys, I think you know who I'm talking about, threw the flashbang in, the flashbang came right back at them. And then they kind of, they use their training. You always, improvise, adapt, overcome. Go with the flow. So they, flowed in and got through, and we went in another way. And that's what makes SWAT the elite guys. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. Just operating on the edges, just being able to, like that snap decision. And we averaged, I don't know, 12 to 15 calls a year in Southern Illinois, likewise in Dubuque. I can't remember all. Because the fortunate was no shots were ever fired in anger and nobody got hurt. Yeah. That's probably my most cherished legacy.
So when you look back at your career, do you have any regrets?
I think every officer does. Cases they could have handled differently. I remember I was in charge of death investigations, and you talked about family before, and 3 years in a row, I went out on Christmas Day for suicides. And, it really struck home because a couple of them were, one was a man, one was a woman who were divorced, and that was their first Christmas without their kids. And it just really got to them. So, it kind of made me a little more empathetic, but I remember getting a call of what they thought was a fatal accident. It turned out to be a murder-suicide. And it was an interior decorator female, very affluent, was dating an unaffluent painter. He hired her, or she hired him to paint walls. Well, they started having a relationship, and then he was below her social status, according to her friends. And she was breaking up with him, and so they're driving down the street, breaks out, he pulls out a gun, and he kills her. And a couple things about that call, she had a phone, and the phone had 2 numbers in it, 9 and 1. Oh. So we don't know to this day if she was dialing 911 or the exchange started with 910 to call a friend. Wow. So we don't know, but what I regret about that is we didn't know at that time, was this a double homicide? Was this a murder-suicide? What have you? And I called the family at 3 a.m. to tell them their daughter was dead. That was ignorant. That should have been an in-person visit. They didn't live in Darien. They lived in Roselle, I think. Mm-hmm. Should have made somebody go over there and make the notification. That was just absolutely cold. But I was so focused on getting this guy, the offender in a hurry, That I didn't think that through. That was a big error on my part. I feel bad. I still feel bad for the family.
Yeah. So at some point, you decide, you know what, after 35 years, I think it's time to hang it up. What's that decision like for you, and why do you make that decision?
Pretty, a lot easier than you think.
Yeah.
I'd done a lot of research on retiring before I retired. So I knew that one day that was going to come. Now, I had been police chief 5 years, and I know the average life expectancy of a chief is 3 to 5 years, which is generally the mayoral election cycle. Mm-hmm. And I was getting ready to get another mayor, and I was a little hinked up about that. How are you going to get along? I had gone through several city managers. Roger Kennedy retired and gone through a couple more. And it's like, oh man, now I got to do the meet and greet, and it's like 51st dates. I didn't want to go do that again. And so I was going to retire, and then my son calls up. He goes, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to come down." My wife at the time was still living in DuPage County because she was very close to her mom. My son said, "I want to come and live with you and finish my education." So I never wanted either of my son to had college debt. Mm-hmm. So he went to Kaskaskia College, and he was academic All-American. He walked onto the hockey team at McKendree University. He was a starting goalie for them, and I just kept working until he ended school. So then I thought, I'm going to retire this year. Year 7, of working in Salem, and then he decided to go for his master's degree. So I had to stay a couple years longer. So now I'd been there 10 years plus. The department was running fabulously. I had made several changes to the organization. One was making a deputy chief. Was a female who was sensational, very intelligent, very policy driven, just super, super slick. So when I left, I wanted her to be, take my place, but it's Southern Illinois. It's a lot of old, good old boys, and they were not ready for a female chief, so they promoted somebody else, which I think was a mistake. But for me, I was fine. Then I decided to teach for an extra year, which I hated. That was a mistake. I just like, oh God, I want to be off. But concurrently, I was writing a newspaper column. I know this is probably not going to believe chief police to a columnist, but I wrote a newspaper column for 5 years for a paper with 20,000 subscribers. I wrote over 400 columns, and the name of the column was A Casual Observer. And I just write whatever. They told me, write whatever you want. So, I might write about your sandals, or I might write about COVID, or I might write about police work, and just whatever. They loved it. And so then I did that, and then I was refereeing ice hockey for 5 years, which was a difficult gig. I did kids to adults. I got yelled at more I had more stress as a referee than I did as a SWAT guy. It's just brutal. Parents are the worst. But no, it was time. I wanted to go off on a horse, not on a rail. So, I just like go when your stars shining rather than descending. So
you did a lot of stuff after you retired. What are you doing now?
I'm almost embarrassed to tell you. I'm fully retired. I did the refereeing and the newspaper columns. I play golf. My wife and I travel. And, I just goof off, basically. Yeah. I'm 70 years old. I live in Florida now, but we're moving back to St. Louis because we miss family and friends. But overall, I'm busy, but the question comes up, and I saw some of your other interviews, you still stay in touch with other cops. And yeah, Facebook is a really big, plus for that. But, when you get kicked up to management, you're not really happy. There's not too many happy faces, something. You think you're doing great, but sometimes, you think you're doing okay. But, I still have guys I work, SWAT guys I stay in contact with, of course. But no, I'm fully retired.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to ask you,
go.
Do you miss the job?
I do. I do miss the guy. One of the questions you asked in another interview is, what's the best part of your job? Well, I love being a patrolman.
Yeah.
Loved it. It's the most fun I ever had in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Every day it's something it just never is boring. Now, when you go to detective, it's a lot more complicated. You got to use your head a little bit more. When I went out of detectives, I went back to patrol. I was a way better patrolman, way better patrolman. But as you ascend the ladder, it becomes less and less fun. There's a lot more problems, a lot more politics. A fellow chief told me one time, you don't have to be a politician, you have to be politically savvy. And that was really good advice. And I didn't hire to be a policeman in 1978 to be politically savvy. I wanted to kick doors, which thankfully SWAT gave me an opportunity to do. I did a lot of death investigation cases, solved a lot of crimes, did a lot of, what I think I did a lot of good things. So would I go back and do I miss it? Yeah, I kind of do, but it's a young man's job. I mean, the older I got, the stuff you do when you're 35, you can't do at 45. Officers that are patrolmen at 48 or 49 years old, God love them. I don't know how they get the energy to do it, because it's grueling. It's grueling on you mentally. It's grueling on you physically. You rotate shifts. It's a tough gig. But it's the most rewarding gig you're going to find, I think.
Words of advice for somebody who's considering becoming a cop?
Don't take social justice classes. Spread your wings. Take business law, take a business class, take something else, because if you find out down the road, and we all do it, you get about the 10-year point, you go, maybe there's something else out there. I looked at IT for a while. I took computer classes. I really thought, maybe I'll go to IT. You need to have a parachute, I think. And if you take a business class, well, when you go to, maybe you ascend the ranks, and all of a sudden your business acumen allows you to do budgeting that I had to go to staff and command school with. So I would say that's number one. Number two, don't lose your sense of self. You came in with high ideals. Don't lose them. The other thing I used to do when I taught classes, I taught at a private university, big money. So the kids coming through there were somewhat affluent. But I would bet $1 to donuts nobody had been to a crime scene. So when I taught classes, I would start class by saying, this is a very realistic law enforcement class that you will be receiving. If swearing offends you, drop my class. I won't be offended, because officers that respond to scenes, you're going to be sworn at. If you go to a violent domestic, and somebody's yelling at their wife, they're not going to say, oh, officer, would you stand outside for a few minutes? No, they're going to say, hey, you asshole, get out of my house, and you're going to have to deal with it. Most of you have never seen a dead body. I will show you pictures of dead bodies so you know what you're going into. If you drop my class, it's no problem. Never had anybody drop my class. I would begin every class with dead body of the week, and I would show little things like, I remember a suicide call we went on, and I was not in charge of death investigation at the time, but it wasn't a suicide, it was an autoerotic death. Guy hung himself from a doorknob, ran a rope over the door, and hung himself. Well, nobody ran their fingers across the top of the door to see if there was indentations from the rope being there beforehand. So I said, this is why we're going to show these pictures. So you, as a neophyte, a law enforcement officer, can go on and do this stuff. We would practice building searches. I would take my class and we'd go out on an empty building. So I feel that the more you can educate yourself and be outside of the police world, I think is a good thing too, but you come into it and basically you don't know anything. My brother is a law enforcement officer, and when he was on the job, maybe 6-8 months, he was directing traffic around an accident. He got hit by a drunk driver, almost killed him. He spent 10 days in a coma. He was 2 weeks off of work, or 2 years off of work. City was nice enough to take him back. He's a shadow of himself, what he used to be. And thank God for the Brotherhood of Law Enforcement, because that's who he hangs with. He's a member of the Blue Knights Motorcycle Club. And when you get into this job, you have brotherhoods that will always be there. I know this is macabre, what I'm going to go into now, but when you go on SWAT calls or any kind of call, I mean, you're just a patrolman, you're going on a building search, for that moment, you guys are connected. Nobody knows that bond. Because they've never been there. You and I have been on calls together where it's like, okay, it's just you and me. And, that bond cannot be broken. And so I told my wife, I said, they're going to play music at my funeral. And one of the songs I want played is Brother in Arms by Dire Straits. Because nobody knows that brotherhood until you've been there. And I want the lyrics so everybody can read them. I know it's macabre and probably way outside the box of what you're doing here, but I really believe in the job and I really believe in what we do. And I used to show in my class, my last class before finals. And for the record, I was a really easy teacher. Really easy. I guess that's why I was adjunct of the year twice. Yeah. But I would show this video, it was called Empathy by the Cleveland Clinic. Short video, 7 minutes, but I would show it to all my classes. And I would urge anybody watching this to watch it. Empathy by Cleveland Clinic. And it was just the day, somebody gets diagnosed with cancer and they're going up an escalator. And they would have a little caption of, just diagnosed with cancer. And the guy just like got his head down and, here comes a guy coming from the elevator that just is cancer free. And it's like, the traffic stop you make, you don't know what that guy's going through or what happened. So be professional, but be empathetic at the same time. And it was a very powerful video and I still watch it today.
Wow. So a guy kind of talking a little bit about, there was a point in your career where you're like, hey, maybe I'll try IT. And not to necessarily say that you were in a funk, but maybe you got that 10-year guy that's in a funk. You have any advice for him or her?
Well, some of it's on management. I mean, when I came into Salem, they had a super high crime rate. They had kind of apathetic officers because nobody was doing anything. They were kind of told like, just, let's not get into trouble. And, that I'm like, we came in this job because we wanted to make a difference and we wanted some excitement. So I told the guys, hey man, we're going to start kicking doors. We're going to start making arrests. We're going to start seizing houses. If they're rented, we're going after the landlords. And we're going to make a purpose for your life. So I think maybe if you're the 10-year guy, you got to find that purpose again. Now, if it's being in an assignment that you want to be, vice or, whatever. Now, the challenge though, especially as an administrator, is if you're in a small department, how do you make the guy who's been on the job 10 years, there's not opportunities for him. So, I took the permanent detective position in Salem and we cut it down 3 years. You got a 3-year gig and somebody else comes in because you've got to keep the cycle. You need some fresh eyes. You've seen detectives, they get burned out too. Yeah. They come out. So I think the 10-year guy, sometimes he's got to do some self-reflection, but he's got to find that thing, whether it be, and I understand politics. I understand that, the brass can be bad and I get all that. And I've been in that situation, but you got to be be true.
The guy who's looking at retirement, advice for him, guy or girl looking at retirement.
Have an outside interest before you retire. Got to. You cannot. I mean, I see these guys that they just hang on to law enforcement long after, they're gone and, you're not that guy anymore. It's sort of sad. I'm dating myself here. Back around 1975, there was a movie called The New Centurions. I don't know, did you ever see it? Okay. Did, yeah. And remember there was that veteran cop named Kowalski, and he was the guy, the grizzled guy who taught the new officer all the ways around the policy, whatever. And then he retired. And he had nothing else. And he would go back and he would tell stories, and the cops don't want to hear that anymore. That was you, you're gone, and they forgot about you. So, so that's a challenge for officers, I think, because they still have that connection. They still want to tell the stories. Maybe they get a sense of self-actualization, So I think you've got to really plan ahead on retirement. You can't just go. Whether it's, now I say, I traveled. It's kind of lame, but I've been retired 10 years. I'm kind of good at it at this point. But when I first left, I taught, I still wrote columns. I refereed hockey. I did stuff. But I think that's the big thing. I think you have to cast a wide social net too. I'm not so sure staying with cops after you retire exclusively is healthy. I think maybe you need to hang out with doctors and musicians and gas station attendants and things like that. I've met the greatest guys in the world playing golf. I met a guy a month ago. We ran a Formula One race team. That's interesting. Let's talk about that for a while. So, that's it's a big world out there. Go ahead and experience it.
Chief, I really want to thank you for having me in your home and for sharing your journey with the badge with us.
I cannot thank you enough for being here, and I hope that this does some good for some guys. I know that this is a very difficult time to be in law enforcement. They can't get cops anymore. Now they're giving them away. In my day, it was a job you coveted, and it still is. I wish we'd get back to that.